Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week, the wait is finally over. We have finally come to the point in the Savage Dragon storyline where we have reached the moment where Erik Larsen's greatest creation, Super Patriot, finally gets his own solo miniseries. It's awesome. It's so good, and I can't wait to talk about it. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in July of 1993, we can see here that the cover is fantastic. Super dynamic, action-packed. We get the great shot of Super Patriot doing a backflip while also shooting at enemy soldiers, being shot at from behind. It's a cool sequence. It's eye-catching and a really terrific way of highlighting this character in a way that I feel is completely befitting of trying to capture exactly what Super Patriot is and what his abilities are. Creator, scripter, Erik Larsen. Plotter, storyteller, Keith Griffin. Penciler, inker, Dave Johnson. Letterer, Chris Eliopoulos. Colorist, Laverne Kinzierski, I believe, but I could easily be wrong, and if I am, I apologize. Color separation, Digital Chameleon. Editor, Janie Wong. The story starts out in a wooded area where we see many police cars and fire trucks gathered as we see a lone, possibly FBI agent smoking a cigarette as he's approached by another government agent who claims to be with Special Services. We don't know exactly what that is, but he's apparently the highest ranking person here because the other man immediately starts to tell him everything he knows about the situation. As they walk through the woods, he starts to make idle small talk about what a nice night it is and how he prefers to do it, or these kind of investigations, on nice nights like this instead of on a rainy night, just kind of really filling up the time as they walk through the woods. And then he tells the man that he's bringing through the woods with him that he hopes he hasn't eaten yet, as the man starts to question it, but then suddenly gasps when he sees exactly what it is he's been called in to deal with. We then get this big 2-page splash image of the man from Special Services being shocked at the image of a field full of burning crosses with individuals crucified on said crosses, and the man who led him here saying, wow, just when you've seen it, everything, as we notice that one of the crosses does not have a body on it and instead just has a large piece of fabric hung on it like a banner. The man who is presumably with the FBI then states, don't bother counting, there's 47 in total, and that the Klan must have really rubbed somebody the wrong way, implying that all of the men who are crucified are in fact KKK members. He then states that the perpetrators left a calling card and that the Bureau can't seem to ID it yet. He then tells the Special Services man that everything out here should stink to high heaven and that there should be plenty of evidence for them to follow a trail, but there's not a trace left behind by anyone who was involved in this, and they can't seem to make literally any sense out of it. But before he's finished talking, the man from Special Services instantly turns and walks away, and the man who is presumably with the FBI is confused, stating, hey, where are you going? And then states, fine, be that way, you government prick. Then we are teleported to the Pentagon, where in a sub-basement that is guarded by some men wearing some pretty heavy-duty exosuits with some very large sci-fi looking laser rifles, are standing outside of a door to a laboratory that is filled with other armored individuals and a bunch of scientists who all seem to have a bunch of cybernetic implants sticking out of their bodies, mostly the backs of their heads. And we see that there's a lot of cylinders and hoses and screens all over the place. And we then pick up on a conversation where one of the scientists tells Shaft from Youngblood that he is out of line. Presumably, the lead scientist tells Shaft that he understands that he was an inspiration to them all, but that this is not Youngblood business. However, Shaft counteracts that argument with the knowledge and information that he has full clearance to be here to make sure that everything's on the up and up, and he wants a full tour. The scientist then agrees to show Shaft what he's here to see, and as they walk down the hallway, he talks about how, he's in rough shape and that there seems to be glitches in the programming, and Shaft questions, programming? But the scientist then states, can the attitude, Shaft? This subject went into this with eyes wide open as he opens the door to reveal none other than Super Patriot, strung up by a bunch of cables and wires and hoses, and he's unconscious, and Shaft is pretty shocked at what it is he's seeing here, as he is definitely not on board with the way that this longtime American superhero is being treated. Also, the manner in which the scientist speaks is kind of a weird broken pattern of speech, not really like broken English, but more or less like he's just skipping words in places, almost as if he's, I don't know, like maybe it's supposed to be in reference to his cybernetics, how they're in some way like making his speech more computerized, but he definitely speaks in a broken pattern of speech. Shaft immediately is disgusted by what he sees and tells the scientist that this is sick. However, the scientist tells him that this is completely necessary until they know what they're dealing with and can control him. But Shaft really doesn't want to hear it. He says, damn you techno creeps, there's a man in there. But the scientist rebuttals with, is there? How much of one is left? Let me show you what we're up against, as he walks over to one of the computers. Meanwhile, in perhaps another part of the Pentagon or another government building, we are then brought into a meeting where the man we saw from the special services at the crime scene with all of the crucified victims is giving a presentation to a room full of other high-level government officials, presumably. And the fact of the matter is, he knows exactly what group is responsible for what was done in that field, as he states that the culprits were in fact a terrorist organization known as the Covenant of the Sword. And that up until now, the government wrongly believed that they were mostly low-level, only executing small isolated attacks, and that they weren't really any kind of real threat to the U.S. However, they have started to change their tune on this as they realize they were very wrong in underestimating exactly how strong this group really is. We then find out that the government has actually been tracking the Covenant of the Sword for quite some time, and has actually linked them to several high-profile terrorist attacks. However, the Covenant's secrecy has actually served them rather well, as it turns out the government actually doesn't know anything about the Covenant of the Sword in terms of who their leader is, the number of members they have, or the number of assets. And what they have to do now is figure out exactly why the Covenant has decided to go public in such a big way, and figure out a plan of how they intend to deal with them. The man that we saw at the beginning says, gentlemen, we have to figure all of this out, but then is abruptly reminded that there is a lady in the room as well, and he says, I'm sorry, and ladies as well. And then he tells them that they have a plan that they're working on, and it's going to involve sending an asset out to basically respond to this act of formal aggression and coming out into the light on American soil that the Covenant of the Sword has perpetrated. Meanwhile, we then are teleported to a battle sequence featuring Super Patriot kicking ass and taking names as he jumps through the air, unleashing all sorts of firepower against his foes. I love this image, by the way. It's so fantastic the way that Johnson has drawn Super Patriot here with one arm turning into some sort of like high-tech laser cannon, and the other one splitting off into multiple gun barrels that are shooting another man that he's flipping over. For those of you who don't know, Super Patriot's powers are that all of his limbs are made out of nanomachines that he can then use to basically transform his limbs into anything he wants. Within the abilities and capabilities of the said nano machines. But a lot of people draw this kind of lazily, where they just make his arms look like a bunch of tubes, like almost like they're paper towel rolls that are just silver, which I personally hate. Whereas Johnson has taken the time to really go into some pretty awesome detail in terms of the technological aspect of what he can make with these limbs. I think part of this is due in part to the fact that Johnson is very heavily inspired by manga and anime of the early 90s. You can see this easily in his work. It's not that hard to draw parallels between what we see with the artwork that he puts forth in this book and other manga, or I say other, but manga such as, like Ghost in the Shell or Appleseed or Battle Angel Alita, Akira. It's very in line with the way that the technology in those books is portrayed. And by the way, I'm not criticizing. I love those books and I love this book, and I am here for everything that Johnson is doing. We then see Super Patriot opening fire on some other soldiers, turning one of his hands into a minigun. He then dodges some returning gunfire as he then runs forward, flips over the two men shooting at him, and then opens fire on them from behind, blasting them in half. He then turns around and continues his assault, just laying waste to everything. However, he then suddenly turns around to see that he's being confronted with none other than the Savage Dragon. Now, this, of course, harkens back to Super Patriot's first appearance, which was in Savage Dragon number 2 from the original Savage Dragon miniseries. If you'd like to know more about that, feel free to go back and watch that episode in my Savage Dragon playlist. But this is something that is going to be a problem for Patriot, as Dragon was the one who was able to actually stop him before, and now he's being confronted with that same foe. We then see that Super Patriot does not do anything. He actually freezes, and this leaves a wide opening for Savage Dragon to launch his attack as he runs forward and clocks Patriot in the gut with a huge punch, as we see pieces of Patriot's back exploding out from behind as he's presumably been killed in a giant boom lettering right here. Also, I really need to commend Chris Eliopoulos in all of the background lettering that he does in this issue. There's a lot of panels in this issue that don't have backgrounds, but they don't just keep that negative space. Eliopoulos actually fills all that in with like gunfire and sound effect font, which is fantastic. He does such a good job with it. We then realize that none of this actually happened. This was, in fact, a simulation that they had Patriot in. And this is where the scientist states that this is a problem that they keep encountering, that no matter what simulation they put him in, if they at any point introduce a superpowered being for him to face, that Patriot automatically sees that villain or whoever it may be as Savage Dragon. In fact, it wasn't even Dragon that they put into the program this time. It was a completely different person, but he registers that person as the Dragon and immediately freezes. And Shaft is like, well, that means that there's still a man inside of here inside of there that's making moral choices. But the scientist states, well, those choices get him killed. And, that's not really a desirable trait for a weapon. And this just completely sets Shaft off as he's like, a weapon? Are you out of your mind? This is Super Patriot. He's America's fighting force, and he's a living legend. And I'm going to be damned if I'm going to stand here and let you do this kind of stuff to him, when suddenly the conversation that he and the scientist are having is interrupted when we once again see the man from Special Services show up, stating that he has a bit of a request that he has to make. We're then several hours into the future as the scientist starts to argue with the man from Special Services, stating, I think this is a bad idea. He's not ready. There are too many variables that we don't know. But the man states that this is not a full-on operation where he's expecting Super Patriot to just go in there by himself and completely annihilate the Covenant of the Sword, that this is just a retaliatory strike, and that a message needs to be sent to the Covenant that these actions will not be tolerated. One of the other men in the room states that Super Patriot is now primed, And the man from Special Services then tells him, "Go get him, big boy, it's time to party." We're then teleported to the Black Hawk Country Club as we see a limousine pull up and the woman who we saw in the government meeting step out of it. She asks if her cabin is ready. The man who was driving the limo states it's absolutely ready to go. She walks in, walks straight to the closet, opens the door, and then opens a keypad and punches in a code that opens a second hidden door that opens up to a room with a robe. We then see her with the robe on as she is approached by a member of the Covenant of the Sword. And this is because she herself is a high-ranking member of the Covenant and is actually a mole working inside of the U.S. government and is spying on the government on behalf of the Covenant of the Sword, as we find out that the Covenant is actually well organized and much stronger than the government seems to realize. The man then tells her that she's late, but she says to take it up with United Airlines as they start to descend into the facility underground on an elevator. She asks if the council has convened, and the man tells her that they've been waiting on her. And she then states that they're going to get more than they bargained for. However, they were prepared for just such a reaction, and that at last, the world from this day forward will belong to the Covenant of the Sword. As they continue to move deeper into the facility, into a large room where there is a man who's a complete, like, techno cyborg floating thing. I don't know exactly, but I'm here for it. States, do you have news? The woman then states, I do. The government is treating this like a standard terrorist attack and is going to respond in a standard manner, and that they have no idea what they're dealing with. The man who seems to be in charge then states, well, we're going to just have to teach them then not to underestimate us. And I got to say, I really love this whole sequence, the way that the scaling is done for the underground facility. Very much, again, in a manga/anime type of style, and I think it looks fantastic. And it really, again, illustrates the scale to which the Covenant of the Sword is operating at and shows, that this is not just some like 2-bit operation. These are some people who are very well organized, very well funded, and are making a strong play to potentially conquer the planet. The woman then informs the leader that the retaliatory strike will be carried out on the facility on an island that they purposely made known to all of the different government organizations around the world. Just in case something like this ever happened, they would have a staging area to set up for a counterattack to the response. She then states that the strike will be implemented by a superhuman, but not any of the young blood at 0600 hours tomorrow. The leader then states, well, they hope to teach us a lesson, but tomorrow we're the ones who are going to be doing the teaching. We're then teleported to a small Caribbean island the next morning as we see Super Patriot walk straight up out of the ocean, which you wonder, did he get there by submarine and then just walked his way across the bottom of the ocean, being that he probably can't swim very well or isn't very buoyant. But we do see a potentially rebreather, or, well, I guess it would have to be a rebreather instead of like an oxygen tank, that he produced himself pulling away from his mouth. Now, this is important to note because while Super Patriot's limbs are fully mechanical, his main torso and head are not totally mechanical, and that he does have still living, functioning organs that are required to keep him alive. So he can be killed by suffocation or drowning, and the chest, torso, and head region are not, bulletproof or completely impervious to attack the way that his limbs are. He then turns to see that there is a gunship flying towards him. As he looks up as they open fire on his location, he springs into action quickly, trying to dodge the fire and transforming his arms in the same moment to use as guns to return fire. Again, more of the sound effects in the background taking up the open sky bits. I really appreciate that. Patriot then turns, falling onto his back, opening fire and striking the plane, which then crashes and explodes. However, a second plane then starts to chase him and open fire. However, one of the men inside the plane states, remember, we're not supposed to kill him, we're just supposed to herd him to the designated location. However, Patriot manages to jump out of the way, not realizing that this is the plan. He then continues his escape. However, as the men in the plane believe they have the upper hand, Patriot turns his arms into some rear-fired rocket launchers and blows up the plane that's pursuing him. He turns to see all the debris falling from the sky. However, this distraction kept him from noticing the giant rock monster man who was sneaking up behind him, that apparently is a member of the Covenant of the Sword, as we can see their emblem on his chest. Patriot doesn't have enough time to react before the first attack hits, as the creature smacks him and launches him through the air with a huge pow sound effect. As the giant rock man then continues to slowly approach Patriot, he basically states that, the U.S. government thought that they had the entire market on superhumans cornered, but they were foolish to think that. However, we notice that, once again, Patriot views this super being as none other than Savage Dragon and will not raise a hand against him. However, this is not going to stop the Rockman, who Patriot sees as Dragon once again, as he states, you're falling right into the plot and the plan that we've had the whole time as we reach the end of the story of this issue. We then reach the section known as Stars and Gripes. Now, Erik Larsen does state that he plans on making this a letter section in the future, but in this one, it's just a blurb that he's written. Most of it is just thanking all the people involved on the book, but I do want to point out, he actually pays a huge compliment to Dave Johnson, where he basically says that, despite the fact that he created the character of Super Patriot, that Johnson has taken the character to heights that Erik could have never imagined. And honestly, his vision of Super Patriot and his abilities kind of puts Larsen's to shame, which I thought was a really big compliment to pay to Johnson, and also very big of Erik Larsen to admit that, someone else took one of his characters and did a way better job with that character than he ever did. We then get an advertisement for Freak Force. Now, I should point out that while I do have the entire run of Freak Force, we can't actually get into Freak Force until we finish the Super Patriot miniseries, because the Super Patriot miniseries bleeds directly into the beginning of Freak Force. But have no fear, that will be coming eventually. I'd also like to point out, this is kind of what I was talking about when I stated I really like the way that Johnson draws Super Patriot. As you can see here, this is an illustration done by Erik Larsen, and he does exactly what I said. These are basically just silver paper towel rolls making up Super Patriot's forearms that are supposed to be guns, but they're not really drawn as any kind of specific type of weapon the way that Johnson does it. And again, this goes to further illustrate the point that Erik Larsen made, that Johnson took Super Patriot to another level that far surpassed his own vision of the character. We then get an advertisement for Trencher. Now, I have a few issues of Trencher. Unfortunately, I don't think I have Trencher number 1. When I get it, I'll probably make some videos about Trencher at some point, but I can't give you a time frame on that. So, just stay posted, all you hardcore Trencher fans that might be watching. I'll get around to it eventually when I can, but, we'll just have to see when I, happen to stumble across a Trencher number 1. We then get an advertisement for Vanguard. If you'd like to know more about Vanguard, you can check out Vanguard's first appearance in my video on Savage Dragon number 2 of the Savage Dragon ongoing series, not the mini-series. And you can also check out my video on Vanguard number 1. We then get an ad for Images of Shadowhawk. I've not done any videos about this because I think I only have like 2 issues of Images of Shadowhawk, and I'm going to have to track some more of those down somewhere, digging through some dollar boxes, which I do really want to do because I'd actually like to have more of the Images of Shadowhawk series. I just currently don't. But when I get them, I definitely will make videos on them. We then see a big giant 2-page ad for Prophet. Now, as I'm recording this video, I have not actually made any videos about the Prophet ongoing series, which I have a bit of. However, I do have a video on Prophet's first appearance, which happens in Youngblood number 3. And if you'd like to check that out, you can find it in my Youngblood playlist. We then see an advertisement for the Max trading cards from Topps, featuring Sam Keith's The Max. I don't have any of these, but I want the whole set more than I can possibly convey in this video. I want to find these so bad, and who knows? Maybe I will, maybe I won't, but God, I want to. And then we see an advertisement on the reverse inside cover for Spawn number 15. If you would like to know more about Spawn number 15, you can check it out in my Spawn playlist, along with all the other videos I have about the Spawn ongoing series. And again, if you're really wanting to know more about Spawn, I am doing a single video per month on the first Monday of every month about Spawn, because I have a complete run of the entire series. And I figured if I've got that many issues of one book, I should probably be making videos about them on a regular basis. And that was the epic first issue of Super Patriot. Now, if you haven't guessed by this point, I am a massive Super Patriot fan. He's literally one of my favorite superheroes. And obviously, my opinions about him are very biased because I like this character so much, but I really do appreciate what was brought to the table with this miniseries. Super Patriot, it wasn't as if it was like some kind of a guarantee that Eric Larson was going to do more with this character than just have him as like an ancillary side character who existed in the mainline Savage Dragon story. But, apparently there was enough of a buzz around Super Patriot that he felt the character could branch out on his own. And I'm glad he felt that way because, again, I love Super Patriot. I love the different miniseries. There's more than one, by the way, and I have all of them, so we'll get to them all eventually. But I really love Dave Johnson's artwork. The manga influence is very obvious, and as someone who grew up watching a lot of anime and reading through manga and stuff like that, I really appreciate it. I believe, it was definitely a departure from what was normally seen in American comic books, especially at this time in 1993. It wasn't common to see a lot of that Japanese influence in American books. And, in a lot of ways, I guess Dave Johnson was kind of ahead of the curve. But in the best of ways. I think that all the artwork inside of this book looks fantastic. I love the fact that even though there are a fair number of panels where Johnson left the backgrounds kind of blank, that, Eliopoulos filled in all of that negative space with the sound effect bubbles. Such a cool touch. And, again, this kind of just shows you that we don't just have to have like these empty panels that a lot of artists tend to do because they're either behind the 8-ball or maybe they just don't feel like filling in the whole background. But it doesn't have to be just wasted space. You can do stuff with it. And this book does to great effect. I could go on and on about how much I love this book, but then again, these are all just my opinions. Your opinions may be completely different. You might hate Super Patriot as a character and think that this book is terrible, and you'd be wrong in both cases. I'm kidding, seriously, though. Everybody's entitled their own opinion on everything, and all of that's fine, and I'm just, totally speaking in jest right here. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.